Hey guys, it's Gina Militia from ginamilitia.com, and today I want to show you a really quick and easy way to rescue an image that's underexposed using Lightroom. So on the screen now I've got a shot of a woman I photographed by the name of Mukti. Now this shot was lit using a grid spot and a reflector as well for some of the tighter images. So this is the setup. And what I usually do when I'm shooting a portrait like this is I expose for my background. So my background is usually quite dark and underexposed, and then I add light to the shot. And in this instance, I'm using a speed light with a little grid spot directed into her face. Now, what happens sometimes is that the flash may not fire. And so what I've got here is an example of where that's happened. So I've got that my exposure for the background is looking lovely, but because the flash didn't fire, I'm not getting any light on Mukti at all. So she's practically disappeared into the shadows. Now, I could let that shot go, but what I wanted to show you is just how far Lightroom will go to rescue detail in shadows, and just how much you can pull out, just how much detail you can pull out of a shot. And it's worth remembering because there may be instances where this has happened to you and you might have files in your archive, or it might happen in the future where you wanted to rescue that image and didn't think it was worth rescuing. Well, I'm here to say that it possibly is, and it's worth playing around with, and you might find some other uses for this particular technique. So here's the image underexposed with some post-production. So I think it looks pretty good. It's never going to look as slick or sharp because we've got some nice hard lighting on her face as the lit image, but it's got a certain look to it as well, and worth considering as an option, as a safety option, if you want to have a try. So let's bring the image up and let's see what's possible. So many people, when they're dealing with an image that's underexposed in this way, the first thing they might try is just try the exposure slider and just try and rescue the image that way. And this works, but what happens is as you increase the exposure, it's increasing exposure in the highlights, in the shadows, and in the midtones all at once. So what's happening is all the detail in my textured wall here has now blown out, and I have picked up detail in the jacket, and Mukti's skin tone is looking a little bit better and she has emerged, but it's at the loss of all the detail in the background. So that to me is not an ideal. I find it too aggressive in the way that it changes the image, and it updates detail in exposure across the board. So I think there's a better way to do that. And so the first thing I do is use the contrast slider. So what we have here on the screen is a high contrast image. So there is a big difference between the highlights and the shadow tones because it's such a hard light, bright, sunny day. So that's why when I expose for the highlights, the shadows almost go to black. So I can tweak that by just flattening the exposure overall, and that's by decreasing the contrast. So if I decrease contrast all the way, I can now see that like the difference between shadow and highlight detail is now a lot flatter. The image overall is a lot flatter. It looks like it was shot on an overcast day rather than a sunny day. So already it's starting to look better. And then the next thing I do is take my shadow slider and move it across to the right. So again, we're picking up more detail again, and overall it's starting to look pretty good. The last couple of things I do is holding down the option key, just click on the black slider and just slide that across to the left. So I'm just getting a bit more black in the image, and that's a matter of personal preference. So I think there looks pretty good, and I'll do the same for the white slider, holding down the option key, sliding the white across to the right, and all I'm looking for is a little bit of a white point in my image. And so just as I start to see a pixel appear up there in the top right of the frame, it has, that's looking pretty good to me. So now what I've got is a fairly low contrast image, but Mukti's appeared from the shadows, and it's all looking much better. I think now it needs some contrast in the midtones, which is exactly what the clarity slider does. It boosts the contrast in the midtones. You can go all the way. That kind of tends to look a bit cartoonish. So I kind of around there looks good to me. So I could leave it at that if I wanted to, and that's it's like a nice evenly lit image. I'd probably just reduce the saturation a little bit to make up for the extra sort of saturation we picked up along the way. So that takes away that digital glow in the image. And the last couple of things I want to do is I just want to bring in a little artificial pop of light to her face. So I'm just using the marquee tool, which is in the develop module. That's the radial filter tool, which is in the develop module. And so just bring it over. You'll see a little X that comes up, and I just drag across a circle and drag it into where I want it. Now, the trick with this filter is the radial filter is to make sure that your feather is set fairly high, because if I don't, you can see that the transition from light to dark is really sudden, and you'll see a line. So if you've got your feather set nice and high, it just blends in really well. So I like to have my feather up around 90 to 100 so that it just blends in, and then you can play with the lighting on the face, and also the size, just making sure that the whole face is lit. So you can see that's the area that we're lighting, only that area, and that's before and after. And so I'll just bring that down a little bit, and just using the up down arrows on the mouse pad, I can be a bit more accurate in how I increase. And so once that's looking good, I want to add some blacks into that as well. Maybe add a little bit more clarity, just so it's looking a bit more natural. Can add a bit more highlight, and maybe just pop in a bit more light. So we've got before, after, and once I'm happy with that, the last thing I want to do is, I just think this wall here is looking a bit flat, so I might just bring in a bit of, just darken that wall off a little bit, just to lead the eye in. Just make sure everything's zeroed off. Yeah, so I'm just basically darkening the wall from the start into the middle there, so the eye leads in. And if I wanted to take it even further, I can just add a couple little spots of sunlight into the shot. Just some highlights here and there. Just to replicate a bit of sunlight, because the shot overall now is looking quite flat. There we go. So just hide all of those. Got before, after, and if they're looking a bit overdone, just knock them back a bit. If you can see them, they're probably too bright. So there you go, a quick and easy way to rescue an image using Lightroom.